Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hey, so good.
Before we dive into this conversation, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Bob Bellerue, and I'm a sound and noise artist, and event producer and audio engineer. I started booking shows in the late '80s in San Diego, and then moved to the city in 2008 and started the End Tymes Festival in 2011. And it's just been an annual festival for noise and experimental music, with an ear towards sonic liberation.
Yeah, before we talk about end times, which is happening soon, I'd love to talk about your music practice because you've had like a 35-year career in music. You've been doing music for a long time, and your work often centers around like feedback systems, like resonant feedback system. And I'm really curious, like, what drew you to feedback as like a main? Is it an instrument? Like, would you think of it as an instrument?
It's a process, but it is it's a product and a process. And I think I was just been a fan of, acid and punk rock and stuff going back, my whole life. And my first practice was actually junk metal percussion and drum circle kind of stuff. And then I was like, maybe I should try to amplify this. And that immediately turned into feedback just because of just not having skills, and then being like, whoa, that was cool. And let's see, can we do that on purpose? Let's try to organize it. Let's try to focus it, Um, it was like with there was some real out there people in San Diego, and when I got started with Crash Worship and people who were really pushing the envelope of abstract music, but also that had real organizational disciplined approach to creativity. And then Einstürzen and Neubauten became an early influence, like a gateway drug, as we say, for a lot of people. I ended up finding their address and writing them postcards and being like, how do we amplify this? And they're like, get some paizos. So it just kind of went from there. And then getting into like studio recording and live sound theater tech stuff, and just getting access to more equipment, different types of equipment, and getting some better skills around how to how to be able to do things live in a fluid sense, so it's not just a it's tricky, like getting into electronic music. Sometimes you can be really limited in your versatility. It's not like using an instrument where you can just quickly change the notes or whatever. You're sometimes stuck in the slower ways of working. And so for me, I was finding that, the mixer has kind of become my main instrument, because I can more quickly respond to things. And rather than uh, software, and and just also not wanting to, I think, invest the time and energy into instrumental music, you know and it's more of a raw DIY approach to just kind of finding sound in a variety of materials and um, relationships, between the speaker and the mic, or the contact mic, or you know so I'll have a variety of these things that I'm using, with little speakers on my table and the bigger ones, and microphones and contact mics and mixer feedback, and just being able to just explore them all and get it to a place where you're then in between them, and there's some like alchemy that you don't quite know exactly what's leading what. Like, you start with one, but you add a little of the other, and it becomes its own kind of sonic organism. And I love that um, that place of not fully knowing what's exactly happening or how I got there, and having to be nimble, not being able to fully pre-compose everything, having to just do more basic sound checks to make sure things are working and the levels are good. But in general, having to create it live in the moment on stage with people in the room. Um, and I just find that really fascinating and exhilarating, and you know, keeps me young.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I remember listening to like your piece, like the one that you did in 2021, something desire.
Radioactive
Yeah.
desire.
Yeah. It was really, yeah, really amazing because like for this piece specifically, you've worked with an ensemble. How did that happen? Like how did you? So basically, you were like each person had like a speaker.
Yeah, I created some simple scores for a small group of kind of like chamber and improviser musicians, and depending on the piece, I was definitely routing them through my own speakers, and some of them were attached to metal. Sometimes they were just like up in the distance in the balcony in the back of the room, and so just to harness kind of their sounds in through the physical media of these objects, that are these sound objects. Um, or there was a piece called bass feedback where the two upright basses each had a small speaker, and then that was just being fed to their own pickup, so then they can make feedback within their bass to create different tones and textures, and then the other players were responding to that. Or I did one for organ feedback where I put speakers up in line with the organ in the back of the room, and then used a room mic to make feedback to pick up the sound of the organ as well as kind of create like you know three-dimensional acoustic processing in the room.
And is it like so? Because like you've collaborated with so many musicians, and you also have duos, like a project with like you have Killed Eternities. What do you think of collaboration? Like how, like what makes a collaboration successful? And I'm really curious about like how do you navigate each collaborative project or situation?
Well, collaboration is a fun excuse to just hang with your friends and play music together, and you can. It's a lesson in like holding back and also being able to jump in. You know, because some of the best improvisers are the ones where you're even just in a conversation they'll start to respond kind of quickly in the same way with sound, and so sometimes you have to know when to push harder. You have to know when to pull back. It's also been very informative for me to learn about just in terms of sound levels. Because it's something I learned early on that if you can hear yourself really well, sometimes that really means just you're too loud. And so, how do you work with creating sound without having that pure kind of clarity that you have when you're solo, when you have your speakers right next to you in your studio, and working almost more intuitively or just with a physical sense of the music and trusting that the audible sense is going to be more clear to people in the audience.
Currently, what's your live setup? Like, are you still using also like Supercollider and other softwares?
Just Supercollider. Although I've been really interested in the new GRM
Oh
Atelier
yeah,
software,
it's so cool.
because yeah, I want to mess with it because Super Collider is awesome. I've been using it forever, but it's a real pain in the ass to attach to get controllers involved, and you got to do everything from scratch because it's a text based programming language. So it's harder to just be like, oh, I'm just going to do some little thing and click this button and try it out. It's like a whole process and making GUI the interface so you know how to control it. So and when it came out, it was definitely like way better quality compared to others, like even Macs. But since then, everything is kind of, everyone's sharing the same audio, drivers and So I still use that, but the mixer is the main instrument, and I use that for all my inputs and outputs and the routing. And I've got some guitar pedals, and then I've got a variety of small microphones, contact mics, and small speakers. I also have a separate mixer I use for no input mixer feedback, so that I can create that, but also adjust the volume without changing the quality of the sound. Excuse me. Then and then it's just about using the room and the relationship of it, where I become the instrument, where holding the microphone near the speaker and moving it and singing or blowing gently into it as it gets closer to the speaker, and or having a contact mic on a harmonica and then using a speaker driver near it, so you get these, it's both pushing and pulling, at the same time, and they're both leading and following. And yeah, that's kind of that place I like to be in the middle of all that. And I call it a process of like amplified discovery, because you're listening to things that are with contact mics, you're hearing the sound that's inside of an object, or, an instrument or whatever. But it's the kind of thing you don't normally hear unless you really hold it up to your ear.
Yeah, like speaking of amplification, I've read on your website that you participated in one of David Tudor's rainforest.
It was rad. He was not there. He was there in spirit, but I was at Cal Arts. It was my first year. They brought the composers inside electronics to teach some classes, and then we mounted a rainforest. And I had already been working with contact mics and speaker drivers for a while before that, but it was just great to be in this environment and seeing these people who had this whole career based in doing this, and touring with all their giant, there's like a wagon wheel, there's like big pieces of styrofoam, and just seeing the wide range of materials. But also for me, because I wasn't quite at that live signal creation yet. I was more tape, um, and the little bit of feedback, which wasn't quite ready for that. And so, whereas a lot of what they're doing is David Tudor create homemade synths and like tune them for the object to kind of get the object to sing. And so I was doing that a little slower because I had to kind of create tracks that then fit into it. So again, it was another, you know, um, early step in live sound creation, but also it's kind of funny to watch because they bought all of these speaker drivers, and the original speaker driver that everyone used is the Roland Star, which is like this white puck that has a screw in it, and you can screw it into a wall and then use it in like a doctor's office or something for background music. And they bought a bunch of them, but then people would just like burn them out like crazy. It's turning around, like blowing their drivers. And I had my own already, and I had like a gas tank from my old truck. It literally developed a leak. And so I had to get a new one. And then I was like, wait, you going to do anything with that? And they're like, okay, crazy person, go ahead. And, or like a truck spring, things like that.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So you were like doing you were studying at CalArts.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. And then like from CalArts you moved to New York, like directly or.
No, I was in LA for another few years. I had a venue there called Il Corral. It was like a warehouse space. And people used to go, oh, this reminds me of New York. And I'd be like, go back to New York. And, it was really funny. But, I ended up moving out here like 2008, just to kind of, I was out here visiting my girlfriend at the time and like picked up work. And I was like, well, there's a lot of work. Might as well at least check it out. And then it just like I got this job at the kitchen all of a sudden. So just like suddenly super busy full-time job.
From the kitchen you moved to issue project room, and like do you remember which year was it when you move to issue?
Yeah, in 2013, it was right after my son was born. I had been doing some freelancing work for them, but then that became their primary tech right after that. And I was there until 2022.
You've watched, you've experienced so many performances. Like, was there one that really stuck with you, that like you remember?
Well, my biggest high point would probably be working with KG Hino and Tony Conrad. And it was also a very funny experience where KG came in and had like 10 inputs, and we had to connect everything directly through DIs and what have you. And he would go sound check. He had three of these like, metal bands, that they put around plywood, and he had those on contact mics, and they're each individual. So he'd hook one up and shake it, and the other one shake it. And then one of them was half broken, so we had to tape it just right, and then he had his his pedal that's like you know um, kind of proximity effect controllable. I forget what that's called. Everyone's seen them, and all these different things, and it all sound checked separately. And then Tony is like, oh, okay, let's see, and he has a little Mackie mixer, and he's got something going into it. He's like, "Choo, choo, 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 choo." Okay, I'm fine, that's good. Like it was just a classic kind of view of like old school versus new school. And like at the end, KGN was like, most excellent engineer, and I'm just like, oh my god, you know what I mean? Like, it's very cute of him. He probably says that to everybody. But
No, no, but you're honestly like, yeah, you're very unique, because I think like to have like a good sound engineer, you need to have someone who also has a practice, because like you really care. Like it's not like in some venues where people, like I feel like you can sense when the the sound engineer doesn't really care, not care, but like, you know what I mean? I don't know how to explain it.
yeah, sometimes they don't care. You know, we've all worked with like grumpy engineers who just kind of, I don't know why people do what they do and they're not happy about it. But some people, maybe they, are unfulfilled in their own life, or they want to be the successful ones. They don't really like the music. I can it some people sometimes, I mean, you deal with this as an engineer, you work on a show, sometimes you don't like it, but it's your job. And I've just I because I do noise, I can turn any sonic experience and I can just imagine that it's noise. So techno, which I really can't stand, I can just imagine it's noise, and I just focus on like the oscillations and the hertz and the dBs or whatever. And but I definitely respect everybody's way of working, and I know that I have my way of working, and I can't necessarily change it because somebody else has a different idea for me or whatever. And so it's all about respecting the artist and how they do it. Also, I feel like comfortable tweaking things to make it sound what I think sounds good. So there's times that, and I don't know, some people, traditional engineers who are working in a rock context, they've often got their signature sound for snare and kick and things like that. And I don't have that level of experience and muscle memory and understanding of instrumental signals, but with more like electronics and sound art and experimental stuff, I'm comfortable just being like, oh, especially at the room of issue project room, which is this very acoustic resonant space. There's just certain things that are going to sound better than others, and knowing how to um, make the room sing, in a way. Um, and so that and issue was a really good experience. It taught me a lot as an engineer about like if you want something to be louder, really, you often have to take other things down because you can't just necessarily turn everything up. Um, and yeah, just how to mix things really carefully, you know.
Yeah, I really feel like, like the way you impacted so many artists' archives, like in a good way. Like I feel like your work, because like we never think like for instance, I mean it's personal, but when I play at certain venues, I see like sometimes the recording is not good, and that's all I have from that moment. But at issue, I remember like I still have all the archive, and I'm yeah, thank you, because it's so nice that like to have good archival works, and I think
Oh yeah, for sure. That's been important to me because I mean, even at the Che Cafe in the 80s, I had a 4 track and I was starting to do like recording off the board and also a room mic and trying to figure out how to get archives, which was much harder then now than it is now. But even at the kitchen, I remember I put in like multi-channel, like ADAT connections or something so that we could multi-track stuff. And then now with all the mixers or most of the mixers have a USB connection so you can multi-track much easily. And but that was just like, why not? You know, we're supporting artists, we're presenting them, we're giving opportunity. Why not try to give them, the best documentation? Because I've learned, I record everything I do, pretty much every live show, because I just my practice, but also I've learned that not everything sounds good afterwards. Sometimes like a great gig just doesn't sound that good, in the because it's just missing the actual experience of being there in the room and the vitality of the audience. And sometimes a gig that doesn't seem to go well, you listen to it and you're actually like, well, this recording is actually pretty compelling. It's different, the approach or whatever, like, I tried to do the thing and it didn't do it, but then it turns out later you hear it and you're like, it's got a whole different kind of either vibe or pacing or whatever. And so I think it's important to just kind of record as much as you can. And then if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, you can, move on and not lose stress over it. But the worst part is like when you rarely record and then when you are like, okay, we're going to record this one. And then you go in and you're like, okay, we're recording. Everyone ready? You remember your parts? And you're just like, never go, and everyone's stressed the fuck out. And so that's the nice thing about it, just being, just hit start and don't even pay attention to it.
yeah, that's awesome, because like also you've been like releasing a lot of like recordings from like on Bandcamp, like you like there is this process of like you're performing, you record, and then maybe you put it out. Like what's your process with Bandcamp and uh yeah, creating this archive, like this public archive versus your own private archive?
I just when I have time, I will go through and listen to stuff, and then stuff starts to stand out as like, oh, well, actually, I'm really appreciate how this one captured that. Sometimes it takes me a while to listen to things, and I forget what it actually was like in at the show or in the. So it's kind of a new experience, and I kind of view it as a whole different iteration. I don't have this preciousness around like, well, that recording, I can't mess with it. I just treat it as like, this is like raw material that I can then either edit or remix or add to or combine things. And so, yeah, I just find that I'll listen to things as I can, and I'll play them when I'm commuting to work or whatever on my head. Actually, I've had this funny experience. I'll be on the subway listening to some recording, and it's all really heavy, and I'm sitting there just going like, banging my head, just like, oh yeah. And I look around, and everyone else has got their earbuds in, and they're all banging their heads. And I imagine that everybody is listening to their own like whatever gnarly, album that they're creating, and that they're like, oh, not like that they're just listening to shitty old Spotify or whatever, but uh, and I enjoy listening to my music. It's because it's like it's the energetic pulsations and that not knowing that I like kind of being within. And so it sometimes it takes me way too long to get to get finished with albums, and I feel like it's a great success if I finish an album and I don't like absolutely hate it and never want to see it again. You know what I mean? If I'm like, get it out of here, it better be done because I'm not working on it anymore. Like I've had that happen a few times, and I'm trying to let myself just be more open and not so controlling where everything has to be perfect, because you can easily strip away the humanity of it. If you try to take away any little glitch or something that isn't quite right, because especially working with feedback, stuff like goes wrong all the time, and sometimes you got to embrace it.
And especially like because you're a technical director, now at Pioneer Work. So it's like a this you have your own professional practice that has been going for so long, and then on the side you have your own musical practice and curatorial practice. Like, do you feel like your job informed your artistic practice in some ways, or do you see it as like a barrier?
Well, let's see. I'm lucky in that, especially working at Issue Project Room and Pioneer Works, I am working with friends, in the staff, also on my crew. It's like it's all noise artists on the crew, you know what I mean, and all friends, and especially Pioneer Works. It's like they're like the best team I've ever worked with. The technicians are just really amazing, um, and also the artists that are coming in. I often will know them or they'll know me, and so we already kind of have a good relationship that way. Here, I'm actually very little. I never run sound. I'm not really working events usually. I'm helping out. I do the planning and prep and the admin and stuff for the department, but I help out with setup. I enjoy it as long as I want to stay, and then I go home because I'm just like I told them I don't want to work nights and weekends, like at least not all the time. But uh, it's I've definitely learned a lot from doing live tech work in terms of both just getting better at engineering and learning about lighting and the whole experience and professional approaches to more formal types of performance, and then I can then incorporate that in how I approach my own set or end times, so that I can know like, okay, well, we don't want the show to run 3 hours late. So we want to start on time. We want to try to gauge exactly how long a set actually is. How much time do we need for changeover? How do we like keep it moving without it rushing? How do we accommodate people who have last minute technical issues or whatever? Like how do you just kind of create a good experience for the performers, for the audience, for the art, for all of us. And so the work has definitely been good that way because we can do all the tech stuff really efficiently and professionally and good quality and make recordings and whatever, but we can also make sure people are fed or make sure like someone has a place to sleep um prioritize that over our maybe not prioritizing our desire to schmooze and hang out with our friends and party and ignore our responsibilities, which sometimes happens in some contexts, um, and we've gotten more, I think, better that way in terms of toning things down the last few years and not going until 3 or 4 a.m. and just kind of um, having a more concise lineup. Like we have 25 artists, I think, this year, and it's not 45 like we've done in the past or more. And then when we did End Times 5, which is in 2015, we did 5 days worth of programming, and so 3 days is great. I could still see doing other things like, but it might be nice to do, say, like a special event that's got like one artist who does something durational or in a different type of context. It's more of an art context, or we used to do video performances and exhibitions and sound installations. We used to do work at Knockdown Center before they had their liquor license, and they were just super open to whatever. And we had a weekend full of sound installations, and um, we used to do events at Outpost with video. So we used to do a lot more things, and I miss that. But at the same time, it's like I have you know my son was born in 2013, and so it's just been a process of like, how do I keep my shit together and take care of my family and like not you know like lose my mind
So
trying to.
like your son, like is he in music? as well, or
He is. He's funny because he knows all this whole world. He's not necessarily interested in it, but I know it'll at least influence him enough that he can feel like he can do whatever. But right now, he's actually he sings in a choir in a church, and he has taken piano, but he's kind of cut that out. We're trying to get him back into it. But then out of the blue, a couple years ago or last year, he's like, I wrote a rap song, and I was like, what?
what?
And with AI, it's kind of insane what AI can do. He had a friend at school, and that friend made some beats using a website that kind of you can create beats, and it's probably AI result, but and then he made some beats, and then my son wrote some lyrics, and he did a kind of a mumble rap recording over it, but then you can feed that into another website and it creates a voice and it totally sounds like him as if he was 17 or 18 years old. It's really funny. It was like because he's almost 13. And so it was, it was super slick and I was just kind of like amazed by it because he wrote the words, and he created the pacing of it with his friend's beats, but the actual like performance was generated by this machine. So it's just kind of wild to just think about like what is the future holding for us all, and when when Spotify is just going to start creating all their own knockoff fake, fake bands and what have you. For me, I'm now, especially since the pandemic, I'm like really focused on, IRL experiences, physical presence, communication, conversations, hangout sessions with friends, or even like maybe friends I don't even know yet. You know what I mean? Like I'm really focused on that, and my setup gets more and more elaborate, and it takes longer and longer to set up, and there's more bags, and so sometimes I can get a little like overwhelmed, and but I always like put it on like it's such a great experience to play music, but also like seeing people, talking to people, has just been so good, and that's what we need, and that's something that Spotify can never, and AI, AI therapists and whatever, like that they can't do that. They can't, provide that to all of us. And uh so that's what and I also with all the fucking shitty political shit going on and the wars and ice, fuck ice and all that stuff. I had a moment where I was like, do I really want to be in the entertainment division of like a dying empire, and but it comes back to like community and about creating opportunities for people to express themselves and to be them, to be human and be unique, and and I get random messages all the time from people being like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and so it's really great to hear that, because when I got started it was very rare for people to, there's very much fewer bands and artists in the world. And nowadays, there's just way more going on, and the ability of people to create at a higher level is just much better. You don't need a studio. You don't need like a 2-inch tape machine and all these like outboard compressors and whatever. It's like you can do so much with just a small amount of equipment, and I find that just really rewarding. And you don't really know what what's going to happen. People are just stuff is popping off, and
Yeah, because I think sometimes when you read the news, you're like, you may feel guilty, like, oh, I'm just a musician, I'm doing this. But then it's not our fault. Like, it's like feeling guilty for some, stupid warmongers who decide the fate of the whole planet. Like, it's just kind of like unfair the way they can, the situation can also impact people's day-to-day lives. And I think music is a privilege, of course, but it's also, like you said, sonic liberation, like being able to experience like very unique ways of making sounds, and music is so important, I think, now more than ever, because like you know what I mean, like I don't know.
Yeah, it's like I've firmly believe that DIY can change the world. You know, that my experience of just booking shows at the J Cafe and like playing junk metal drum jam, kind of hippie punk bands, you know, now it's become this career. So that's changed my life. And it gives me an opportunity to, as a creator and also as like a presenter and as a engineer, but also like, you know, being able to create things with your hands can then lead to these other skills that both in terms of technical skills, but also social skills, working with people. You know, you see people coming up in bands and it's like boot camp. It's like they come out and they're just like, you know, there's a physical fitness, there's this like organizational understanding. Everyone is in charge and yet everyone is also a team player. Um, and then also just having that experience where you hear something that's just brand new out of the world. You have no idea how that was made or what's going on, but you're just having that experience that, you know, we hear about like when the Rites of Spring was played and people were just like rioting or whatever. And it's that I've had that experience, but you know, it's like watching this theremin band or this performer was just so much control over her theremin, like a bebop bass player, and I was just like, "Oh my god!" And I was like ready to explode, you know, and start throwing things. And so having that experience is, you know, can be inspiring and enlightening for all of us to just be like, there are possibilities out there. You don't have to just consume what's fed to you. You know, you can create it yourself, and that also can lead to like political, you know, actions, which is like what is so important for all of us. Like being a voter is important, and like speaking with people about things and difficult subjects is important. Being able to have conversations with people that you don't agree with or that you don't like, you know, you see this a lot more in Europe where people, even amongst friends, are willing to have arguments, you know, because the whole point is you need to express yourself and convey your truth in the moment when it is needed to be heard, you know. And there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the political system in the US because it's like, it's not just that we need to get the right people in charge. It's actually like the whole system is geared around this celebrity worship where whoever is popular is going to be in charge. And then they just stand up there smiling and then behind the scenes, everyone runs around, you know. So, and you also definitely do have people who are like playing by the rules and being cool and polite, or even if they're like inefficient, they're still like not abusing the power. And then you get other people who are just going to do whatever they can and just say fuck you, who cares. And so it's a lot because it's actually like the whole system needs to be recreated, and that's not something that happens, you know, in a election cycle, you know. But having that eye on the prize can at least be informative to everybody, to just be like stay on point, stay engaged, and then but also live your life and enjoy it yourself, and you know, share that with the world because that's like what the point of life is.
Yeah, and like to go back to End Times, it's just fascinating that like you've been doing it for such a long time on the side, you know, of like your music career and like other director, you know, technical director career. And yeah, I'm really curious because this year it's going to be at TVI and Pioneer Works. Can you tell us like what can we expect, like what audiences can expect? Is there like a theme or like a focus, like what how did the curation came together?
um I mean, with a lot of this, to me it's just the only theme is like witness the miracle of sound, right? It's look what happens when people are empowered to, you know, create something anew, you know, where and in the noise world I agree with this idea that it's like every person is their own genre, you know, every act is their own, you know, unique form. And for me, I find a lot of motivation just in that sense of just like um, the unique creativity of different artists, And then what can happen when you get people from a kind of a diverse range of communities together and experience levels and what have you. So I love it when, we've got players who've been around a long time, and then you'll also have people who I've never heard of that, like, because I'm working with Jackson Kowalczyk from JHK last few years, and he'll bring people in that I've never even heard of them. And so I just love that you'll get these people side by side and they'll both just totally destroy it, because people really bring their best to the fest, and that's really satisfying to me that people have so much respect for the festival, that they're excited to be here, they're excited to bring their best set, and also just to celebrate with all of us. What fun can be had, the visceral community. um,
Yeah. And was that like, have you noticed like a change in this like in the experimental noise scene, like since you started the festival?
well, definitely since I started, in the 80s, but since the fest, since 2011, I mean, we've definitely had a lot of innovations in like technology, in pedals. There's a lot more like high-end DSP kind of capabilities in pedals. And then also the explosion of modular synthesis, and um, you know, a lot of and then software, certainly. Recording quality's definitely gone up. But like the whole, the festival started just as an idea of just random people that in 2011 would be like, "You should do a fest, Bob." I heard this a bunch of times, and I finally was like, "Okay, shit, I guess I should just ask some people and see if they want to play." And then everyone was like, "Fuck yeah, I'm there." And I was like, "Okay, well, there it is. That's all it took." And it's still, we still like thrive on that kind of energy, that enthusiasm, that just like willing to like beat a path to our door and make it happen. And and now maybe it's almost become like so familiar that it's like just more back of the mind. It doesn't, people are like, "Fuck yeah," in times. And then at the same time, people are just like, "Oh, that thing that happens every year." So I don't always know how to gauge it, like how, and also we have this thing where, like the ticket sales are important to kind of show interest to a venue, but at the same time, like ticket fees being what they are, a lot of times our fans are like, I don't really want to, I just rather show up and buy a ticket, you know? And so that can be a funny thing to match, because we have to work with professional, spaces, because New York doesn't really have any DIY spaces anymore, at least for this scale, of what we need for the size of the room and what have you. Um, and, and promotion is really difficult because you're relying so much on Instagram, basically. And when we started, it was like, I remember I had a friend who was a DJ at East Village Radio and was writing for them, and he was just like posting, article after article. Brooklyn Vegan was posting, like all these places were writing about us. And now it's actually kind of tricky just to try to get any, response. And at the same time, it's like, whatever, it's going to be a good time no matter what happens, and whoever shows up, and I know I have trust in the audience to be there, and but I have to think more about these things. And do I do I take an ad out on Meta, and does that help? I don't know. um, right now we're just focusing more on posting and, you know trying to get the word out. I also find that handbills are really effective. I go to shows, I hand out a little flyer, and every time there's at least like, cool, there's a flyer in my hand. But a lot of times it's also like, oh, fuck yeah, I can't, I'm psyched. Oh, wait, I know that person. Or, oh, I already got my ticket. So, all these forms are necessary, but the promotion is probably the biggest thing that's, I think, changed over the years. Um, and it's maybe there's also a lot more going on. There's other noise fests happening, um, and so it doesn't stand out. I don't know.
I feel like people are spoiled in New York because they're like, oh, I don't know, like people, like whereas if it was in a different town, like sometimes you have this legend playing, and then people still debate whether they want, you know what I mean? Like, there's just so much going on. But as you said, I think I don't know. Like for me, I feel like now, like young people are more interested in not using Instagram and like just finding things in person. So I feel like it's kind of like weird how this became the new marketing strategy.
Or we have like, excuse me, we have websites like NYC Noise, which is such an amazing resource. It's like more thorough than the Village Voice and the Wire and whatever. It's got everything from you know free improv to harsh noise, and um, it's such a wide range of stuff there. And that's just the devoted work of one person. And sometimes I look at it and you're just like, well, actually going to other cities or in Europe, and people are like, "How is it in New York?" And you're like, "Let me show you." And you go, "Okay, that's Wednesday's list lineup. There's 20 shows going on or whatever." So it's invigorating that way to see how much is going on, and a lot of the stuff I don't know. I don't know the venue. I don't know the artists. It's just harder for me to get out now. Just like it's been great to be at Pioneer Works, but I'm just more of like a working guy now and just kind of busy um and yeah, and just getting people to show up is the key, and to have that experience. And so we got to try all the bases, and posters and handbills I think are still like really essential. Well, I was just thinking how back in the day, like when I got started, I would literally be like, I'm going to go to the record store just to see what's new, what new records showed up, or what, and I'll look at the flyers. And now you're just everyone's on their phones. You see so much, and yet it's also like it's impossible to keep up because there's just even so much out there. And that like intentional, like looking for what's happening.
But this is the thing, like I feel like in a way it's annoying how information is so easy to access right now, because like to go back to Instagram, like I feel like there's many posers, like people who get into experimental music, or you know what I'm like, DIY stuff to just get views. Like you feel like people source their content from this world. Like it's not authentic, it's not like honest in a way. And I feel like but back in the day, like if you want the information, you look for it. Like now people want the outcome without looking for the information.
Yeah, and it's a possibility that people are creating, using all these new AI tools. Actually, I taught at Bard last summer, and I was very surprised one night where there's a weekly like music sound department get together. And in one of the weeks, they said, "Give us a prompt." And so everyone just rattled off a bunch of like sound ideas, and they fed it into this machine, and it created this long, like really gnarly and surprisingly like um you know succulent and tasty kind of like tracks that when it was like a half hour long. And then hearing it, I was both like, oh shit, there goes our career, but but also like I was also felt guilty, like I wonder how many kilowatts did that take, and how many like data, how many communities are being like gentrified and evicted because of data centers, and all that stuff. And yet, and then also this thing with my son's like rap song, it's like so much of that can be created, so without equipment or any skills. So it's an interesting thing, like how people are, in a way, a lot of some artistry in the future is going to be just like how to goose the algorithm and how to get something out of it by like a savvy use of terminology and tools.
to go back to Instagram, sadly, it's like if you don't use it, you don't exist in this, especially like if it's your job. But at the same time, like someone could go and add all of your friends, and then you think they're part of the community, like, you know what I mean, like like you would see that they're friend with all of your friends, so you would think that it's someone in New York who you know, who you know, and it could be someone, who knows, it could be a bot. It's just a dystopian, and I really think that Instagram is evil. I mean, like all the features are very well engineered to make people, to manipulate people, but also like people manipulate each other with the features, and I don't like Instagram. It's sad that we're trapped.
I try to be just like practical with it in the sense of something is an announcement. I try to make a point of, listening to that, or there's like a date for an event and I'm like, put it in my calendar. Cause like my ability to remember all this stuff off the top of my head is, getting worse and worse. And there's so much going on. But I also relish in like missing out too. At some point, you just gotta ignore it, turn it off, and put it away. And it's also been funny to revisit Facebook and see a whole different crowd of people. Like older crowd who like started using Facebook 20 years ago, and then they've just stuck with that. And I see also more conversations there, which I find interesting. That I didn't even look at it for a while, and then you post something on Instagram, it'll post to both places, and I would go to Facebook looking up, say, an old friend because I need to message them through that app, and realizing there's all this conversations going on with the things I posted, and um, all these people that I haven't heard from in a while. And I realize, oh, they're over there. So it's like a different, like, community center nightclub happening over there. And yeah, and I'm just trying to focus on real experiences with, real people. And I also, we get a lot of, attention from younger artists, and, and a lot of them want to play the fest, and I want to support that even if I can't book them all, and I want to like find a way to like tell them it's worth it even if I can't book them, and even if sometimes there can be a little attitude of entitlement or with some people, and you still just, it's just like a need to be seen and be validated, and be heard. And so, and the only way to do that, is you just got to start your own fest, and you got to create your own opportunities, and also you got to just really um, create relationships with people. Like cold calling a venue isn't really always the way to get a gig. Sometimes it works, but usually it's like you show up and you're there and you become friends, and then it can lead to other things. And that's the most important thing, and that's what we need in life. We don't necessarily need noise and concerts. We need friends. We need socializing.
Yeah, definitely agree. And thank you so much, Bob, for your time. This was great.